Well, Dan, it's so great to have you with us today. You've been CEO of PayPal for 6.5 years or so now, but I got to believe the last year has been one unlike any other at this company or any of the ones you've been at before this. I wonder if you could take us back to just about a year ago now when all our lives started turning upside down so rapidly and give us a sense of how the pandemic and the lockdown initially impacted the company, both from a financial perspective and also from the employee perspective, and how you've started to manage through that over the last year.
Yeah, it's a great question. And first of all, it's great to see you, David, as well. Always a pleasure. And thanks to JFF for having me. So the past year was crazy. I can't imagine more things happening in one year that we were less prepared for than ever before. I don't think anybody had a pandemic on our radar screens. And then the cascading impacts of that pandemic, whether it be on the economy and the effects that that had, whether that be on kind of the awakening around social injustice across our country, and the outpouring of emotion that happened after George Floyd's death, and how that impacted all of us, a political system that was fraying and was quite polarizing.
And what did that look like this summer? Because every company was forced to respond to what was happening. People took to the streets. It seemed like every week there was a new video that was a cause for outrage. How were you able to do that? And again, do it when you couldn't actually be with your team in person, which of course is usually so important to just the actual sort of demonstrating of a leader's ability to connect with his or her team. You weren't able to do that. How did you make it work in an authentic way remotely?
Well, everything is more difficult when it's remote, but in some ways you can rapidly get people together and they can see you on a video call, and I felt that was very, very important. One of the things, David, that I was surprised by and quite taken aback by was the amount of emotion that just poured out from across PayPal, and across our country. And I really felt like I needed to do a lot of learning and a lot of listening to figure out how we could best respond. Because, my first reaction is let's support some of the nonprofits that are advocating for social justice, show that we care. But I felt like the first thing was to talk to some of our D&I, diversity and inclusion communities inside PayPal, listen to our Amplify community, which is our Black employees, talk to Black leaders across the country, either from the National Urban League or people like Reverend Barber, and really get their input before we took action. And what really came across to me is that PayPal could make a real difference if they demonstrated that this wasn't a moment in time, but a movement that would last over time. And that's where I sat down with my leadership team. I sat down with my board and basically said, I think we need to stand up and do something that is going to reverberate across the country and really say to our employees that this value that we cherish around diversity, around inclusion, is something we believe in. Because, by the way, every day you need to step up to your values. It's not you do one thing and you point to that. Every day you have to step up. And that's why we decided to put into place a $535 million commitment to reducing the racial wealth gap. Because we felt like it needed to be something that we could actually maybe do a little something about, because we're PayPal. We actually can help Black and minority-owned businesses and communities and measure that impact. And so when we announced that, I think it sent a clear and strong signal across not just the company, but to other CEOs that this is something that you can't do something symbolic. You really need to stand up and do something that's meaningful and real.
Yeah. And this is something we've talked about in the past when I interviewed for Corner Office, which is in past years, I mean, as recently as a half decade ago or so, you wouldn't see big corporations engaging in really intense, fraught social issues like this. And yet now it seems like almost every company needs to take a stand on some of these important topics. How do you navigate that and do it in a way that doesn't alienate different parts of your company? Because with 40,000 employees, I don't need to tell you, there's no guarantee that there's ideological hegemony across PayPal. So how do you take a stand without essentially, losing some of your employees along the way?
Well, actually, you could say the opposite. You can guarantee me that there isn't, a one set of values across every employee in PayPal. And that's absolutely true. And by the way, that's true with our customers as well. We have customers that, are along the entire political spectrum. I respect all of that. But, we have a set of values inside our company, David, and you've seen us act on them over time, from withdrawing from North Carolina because of the bathroom bill, and really just getting right into the heart of some, political discourse. But I always said, it's not politics, it's like values that we're trying to make decisions on. People conflate the two. But from my perspective, if our number one value as a company is embracing diversity, encouraging people to be inclusive, then we need to stand up for that. We need to take action consistently. And I always say inside the company, not every one of you will agree with the actions that were taken. And I respect that completely, and I want to hear your opinions about it. But these are the values of PayPal. And we're going to embed them in our products. We're going to embed them in our acceptable user policy. We don't allow people to use PayPal or Venmo to advocate for violence, spew hatred, or racial injustice or racial intolerance. And those are difficult things to go and do, right? Because, there's always this fine line between free speech and, monitoring your platform. But I feel like we have a responsibility to be consistent in our set of values, monitor that on all sides of the political spectrum, and take action. And I think, look, I've had, as you and I talked about, I've had lots of death threats as a result of it, which, I think, unfortunately comes with the territory of taking a stand. But the impact on our employees, and you asked what came back? We have never had higher engagement scores from our employees than we did in this past year. Never. It was the highest we ever had, lowest attrition we ever had, most pride in PayPal. And, in a very, very difficult year, that matters a lot. It matters a lot in this multi-constituency world that we try to operate in, because I do believe that employees are the number one constituency that a CEO has to pay attention to. There are shareholders, there are customers, there are regulators, but employees are number one in my mind.
There's often an assumption that everyone's in Silicon Valley and doing quite well. But of course, there's, in a company of 40,000 people, a whole diversity of people from various economic circumstances. Can you tell us a bit about what PayPal's workforce really looks like? And that probably will lead into a discussion about some of the moves you made about a year ago that we were talking about even before the pandemic hit.
Yeah, that's a great point, David. Our mission as a company is to try and democratize the management and movement of money, which basically means that managing and moving money should be a right for all citizens, not just a privilege for the affluent. It's a very inclusive statement. And the reason we have that as our mission is so much of the world lives outside the financial system, and they struggle to make ends meet at the end of every single month. And by the way, that's like 2/3 of adults in the United States. It's 185 million people in the US. And so I decided that I was going to do a survey of all of our employees to find out what their financial health was like. And honestly, I was doing it because I thought the results that would come back were going to be really good. Because PayPal, to your point, we're a tech company. We pay at or above market rates everywhere around the world because we want to attract really great employees. And what happened is we got the survey results back, and I was actually shocked to see that our hourly workers, like our call center employees, our entry-level employees, were just like the rest of the market, struggling to make ends meet. They were financially stressed. They were constantly worrying about could they make ends meet. And I was really surprised because what it told me is that and by the way, this is about half our employee population, that for half our employee population, the market wasn't working. Like capitalism wasn't working for that segment of the market, and we couldn't depend on benchmarking, to the rest of the market to pay our employees a wage that they could live on.
And so about a bit over a year ago, you came up with this 3 or 4 pillared financial inclusion program for your own employees. Can you talk to us about specifically what you did and what the impact's been?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I felt we needed to understand is we needed a measurement to basically measure like what was the financial health of our employees. Because people talk about minimum wage, but minimum wage, if it's just a number, it could be good in some areas of the country, but still not enough in other areas of the country. And so we came up with this measurement working with academia and some other organizations called net disposable income, or NDI. And net disposable income basically looked at how much money do you have after you pay all of your taxes and your essential living expenses like housing and food and that kind of thing. And, to our dismay, we found out that about half our employee population, had 4% NDI. So after their essential living expenses, they only had 4% of their income available to like buy textbooks for their kids, medical, that kind of thing. And we also then worked with academia, and what came back is like, really you need to have 20% NDI for somebody to actually start saving, for them to actually start not being financially stressed. And so we set a goal to move from 4% NDI for that part of the population of PayPal to 20%, to increase it 4 to 5 times from where it was. And that's where we came up with this whole program, where we slashed the cost of healthcare benefits by 60% for that population. We gave every single person in the company equity in PayPal. So they all had restricted shares so they could enjoy the same success if we did well as a company. We raised wages where we needed to, and then we wrapped it all in a financial education program. And here we are about a year and a half later, and the minimum NDI inside PayPal now is 16%. So we went from 4% to 16%. Of course, it was expensive.
And I got to believe that a lot of that gap was made up with the healthcare cost, because the stock, that took a while to vest, I'm sure. The raises didn't go across the board, but it sounds like that healthcare piece must have been really critical to the whole equation.
I think if we had just done healthcare, it would have been a gigantic relief for our employees because, healthcare in a weird way is like a regressive tax. Like you pay the same for healthcare as somebody making much less than you pays. And so as a percent of their income, it's much higher. And again, what we found out is that employees were making trade-offs. Like, do I get healthcare or do I put food on the table? That's ridiculous. When we were able to reduce the cost of healthcare, what we saw is like employees now all signed up for healthcare, which, by the way, how it was prescient in a way that we didn't expect, because 6 months later we go into the pandemic. Can you imagine what would have happened if people had not had healthcare benefits and that kind of thing? So the combination of all of that has made a gigantic difference. And by the way, I'm determined by the end of this year that we'll close in on that 20% goal.
That's great. And this cost real money for the company, though. I mean, the stock allocation is one thing, but raising wages and picking up that much more substantial portion of healthcare costs would have been a real material event for the company of PayPal's size. Did you face any resistance from the executive ranks or other shareholders, investors, when you went and you said, or the board for that matter, when you said, listen, this is what we want to do?
You're right. It was a significant and material investment in our employees. And I spent a lot of time with the senior team. I spent a lot of time with my board. And my assertion was, yes, it's an investment, but it's like an investment we do in other parts of our business when we upgrade our infrastructure, our tech infrastructure, or put more money into advertising. Like, I believe very strongly that the only sustainable competitive advantage that a company has is the skill set and the passion of their employees. You show me somebody who believes in the company, who's financially healthy, who's passionate about what we're doing. And I think that our attrition will go down, which has happened. Our training costs will go down, which has happened. Our net promoter scores will go up because we'll be serving customers better, and that's happened as well. And that eventually, over the medium and long term, that investment will pay back to shareholders. I think this whole idea of multicultural or constituencies that you're serving as a CEO is essential. The idea that profit and purpose are at odds with each other is ridiculous. I mean, I think if you ever have any chance of moving from being a good company to a great company, you have to have the very best employees that love what they're doing, that are passionate about what they're doing, and then everything else will emanate from there. And I think when I look at PayPal's success, I would attribute the overwhelming majority of that to the fact that we have employees that are all in on serving our customers.
And listen, Dan, I talk to a lot of CEOs, and a lot of people will say the same thing, that it's time to recognize that all stakeholders are important, but it's few and far between that really, put up the kind of capital that it takes to make difference at scale. So you're talking to these CEOs all day long in your business relationships, at panels, at Davos, where we saw each other what seems like a lifetime ago. What do they say when you say, well, yeah, and we really did it. We put up this money, and this is what it cost, and here are the results? Are other people actually getting on board? Have you seen any comparable initiatives at other companies, or are people still, sort of stuck in the land of platitudes?
Well, it's a good question. I think there's clearly a lot more discussion around the necessity of looking beyond just shareholders. I mean, our companies are all part of our communities. We're part of our economy. Our democracy and our political systems are crucial. And if there's inequality, they start to fray at the edges as well. I don't know how we separate ourselves from our environment. And I think there's more and more understanding of that. But I think it's really important that we start to put in place measurements, real measurements of like, are we making progress? But I do think we all should understand the financial health of our employees and measure it and then decide what we want to do as a result. Look, we control that completely. We can't turn to government to solve all the problems that face us as a society. There are certain things that we have fully in our control, and taking care of our employees is one of those things. And I would argue that it is a competitive advantage for a company when they do so. So that's what I talk about, like what I see from a PayPal perspective. And I encourage people to measure, and then for everyone to make their own assessment as to what they should do from there.
Well, Dan, I certainly hope other companies follow your lead. When it comes to thinking about stakeholder capitalism and the need to address all constituencies, I just wonder the extent to which you really consider employees part of your central business strategy. There's a lot of talk about impact employers, and by some definitions, that would mean really making the well-being of your employees a core part of your mission. Does that fit with what you're doing there at PayPal?
I think it's part and parcel of what we are doing. I think every employee, from our frontline employees to our engineers, to our lawyers, every single employee in PayPal is what makes the difference. Can we deliver a product when a customer calls us? Can we help them out with the problem that they have? Can we solve issues and help companies and consumers not just thrive in this transition to the digital era, but thrive in this new era going forward? And so I don't think there's any more important constituency than our employees.
Well, Dan, thank you so much for your time. Keep up the great work. We'll wish you and PayPal all the success.